Hello, everyone. So I'm Keith. I'm the chaplain here at the hospice, and we're going to talk about spirituality, just because it's part of the responsibility of everyone to be involved in the spiritual care of patients at whatever level. And if that's disconcerting to you, understand hopefully at the end of it what exactly I'm talking about. So here in NICE guidance, it says skilled, sensitive and appropriate spiritual care can be provided by a variety of people, including volunteers. So just thought I'd put that there for you: family members, health and social care staff, and faith groups. Next slide, please. I feel like Chris Whitty. There we go. What we're going to do is explore what's meant by spirituality, to be able to identify signs of what we call spiritual pain. We'll talk about that as well. To recognize your role in the spiritual care of patients and carers, to understand the importance of good communication skills, do a little bit on that in spiritual care, and to recognize your personal boundaries and limitations in spiritual care and know when to refer on. Next slide, please. So spirituality is an integral component of the culture of palliative care services. So this isn't just our idea at Arthur Rank Hospice. This is an international concept. So spirituality is essential to the holistic care of patients nearing the end of their lives. It's important for all staff and volunteers to be aware of the spiritual aspect of any person, including themselves and their colleagues. Spiritual care is the responsibility of the whole multidisciplinary team, here on called the MDT, alongside the chaplaincy team, and is a key element of our work. And all those working in supportive and palliative care need to be aware of the components of spirituality. So next slide, please. There is, of course, this question, is there not? What is spirituality? If you were in a room together, I would make you go into little pairs and discuss this, but you've been saved from that today. So anyone want to just throw in the ring what they think we might be, what kind of thing might we be talking about when we're talking about spirituality? Please do feel free to unmute yourself and just, even if it's a single word or whatever, go on, be brave. What kind of thing might we be talking about when we're talking about spirituality? Any thoughts?
Beliefs.
So may include our beliefs. Thank you.
Hope.
Hope. Thank you. So what might give us hope, do you think? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
You came to see my husband.
Oh, did I?
And you gave him great strength.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm glad he received that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's, for me, it's about being present in the here and now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? I mean, I wonder if when I ask that question, we kind of think we know what spirituality is, and it's until we're sort of pressed to say something that it's a bit more difficult, and that is commonly the case. Don't feel it's from a point of ignorance at all. It's just one of those kind of things that we kind of sense we know, but actually it's difficult to articulate. So, oh, sorry, I've just tried to press my own slides on. Next slide, please. Here's something maybe confidence giving to you. Spirituality, it is said, is a bit like jelly, good if you can grasp it, but notoriously difficult to pin down. So there is this sense in which we kind of know what we're talking about, but how do we actually put our finger on it? We will do better than that, but that's a sort of encouraging definition, but we will do better than that as we go on. But it's that kind of, well, we kind of know it's sort of like this and it's sort of like that. But yeah, so next slide, please. So the World Health Organization in 1990, after what I can only imagine was an interminably long committee meeting, came up with a definition of what spiritual meant. And they said this: spiritual refers to those aspects of human life relating to experiences that transcend sensory phenomena, so that which we cannot touch or smell. This is not the same as religious, though for many people, the spiritual dimension of their lives includes a religious component. The spiritual aspect of human life may be viewed as an integrating component, holding together the physical, psychological, and social components. I kind of like that sentence, but I think that's a bit jelly-like. I don't know, I kind of get what they mean, but what does it mean? It's often perceived as being concerned with meaning and purpose. And for those nearing the end of life, this is commonly associated, I would say not infrequently, associated with a need for forgiveness, reconciliation, and affirmation of worth. So I think if we start thinking about what is it that gives us meaning and purpose, how do we answer the questions, why are we here and what are we here for? And about issues of worth, what have I achieved? What have I contributed? All these kind of questions. So meaning and purpose and affirmation of worth. I think we start thinking along those sort of lines, we're getting somewhere near what spirituality may be, a bit better than just like jelly. Next slide, please. So here's a little saying: we are not human beings having spiritual experiences, we are spiritual beings having human experiences. People often define their spirituality within a personal framework. Each of us has our own worldview. It's often unarticulated. It may include faith assumptions and beliefs about the deepest issues of life. Many of our personal views are influenced by our cultural background and life experience. So some of you, if we went round, which I'm not going to, would know very clearly what your worldview is. Others may not be so sure. You know, at that point when I said, what is your worldview? You may then think about it and within you have something that you'd not articulated. And sometimes that's some of the difficulties that we find when we come to talk to people. Next slide, please. However, it is important that we just make this distinction. So it's helpful to distinguish between religion and spirituality. Spiritual needs may not always be expressed within a religious framework. It's important to be aware that all human beings, we believe, are spiritual beings who have spiritual needs at different times of their lives. And although spiritual care is not necessarily religious care at its best should always be spiritual. So I think if you were in a room right now at a hospice, I would draw you a large circle, all right, on a piece of paper. So imagine it's a bit of, on a flip chart, and I've drawn a circle on there as big as I can. And in that circle, I've put an S for spirituality. And then within that circle, I've drawn a much smaller circle, perhaps over on the right-hand side, and it's probably about the size of a coffee cup. And in that circle, I have put an R for religion. So religion sits within the realm of spirituality. For some people, that circle that I said was the size of a coffee cup may be almost as big as the spiritual circle. For others, it may be very small, but it's always within that circle. So for some people, their spirituality may be intrinsically and essentially based on their religion. For others, it may be something quite different. Next slide, please. So this is pushing the definition of spirituality a bit here. Spirituality is, just to distinguish between the two, spirituality is whatever gives a person meaning, worth, and value within a life experience. The source of this may be considered existential, with reference to a power other than themselves. And if so, that person may use the word God to describe that power or be less specific. But certainly, stepping back away for a little bit from that, often people will talk about something outside of themselves, but even then, it needn't necessarily be. It's about whatever gives them meaning, worth, and value within a life experience. Religion is the means by which we organize our spiritual yearnings, the framework within which we make sense of these longings. How do we make sense of it? What do we do with it? And in most cases, that is a religious framework. Next slide, please. So what is spiritual care? Just looking at my slide. So spiritual care is care usually given into one-to-one relationship. So people say, what do you say when? But it just depends so much on that single encounter, what's coming from the person, what's going on, what their situation is. It's completely person-centered. So no two conversations I probably have with someone is the same. It's always different. It makes no assumptions about personal conviction or lifestyle choices. All right. Always a patient-led encounter. Next slide, please. So I don't know if total pain has been mentioned. Is it, Hannah? No? Yes, no? Total pain.
Slightly touched on.
Slightly. Okay. So Total pain is the term first used, I believe, by Dame Cicely Saunders to describe patients who experience intense suffering. And this is real pain. And it explains the importance of recognizing all the effects of illness on a person and that they are often interlinked. So spiritually, socially, physically, and psychologically. Therefore, it's essential that we do not focus solely on patients' physical symptoms, but consider the holistic picture and how that experience affects them. Therefore, if we can do anything to relieve spiritual distress or psychological distress or their social circumstances, as well as what's physically wrong with them, then we will reduce the real pain that they are experiencing. And so as part of that spiritual pain is that bit of the total pain picture, if you like, which is to do with spiritual distress. And that often, just checking, that spiritual distress is the situation whereby what someone is, what someone's worldview is, does not enable them to satisfactorily deal with what they're experiencing. So it falls short. So someone who says, for example, doctors, of course, can cure all ills, and the doctor says, I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do for you. Or someone who thinks this kind of thing doesn't happen to me, it happens to everyone else. You know, lots of different things. Someone who thinks that what goes around comes around. Now that can mean a number of things. For those who are in the NHS, we see that all the time. You know, something that did 20 years ago comes around again. Equally, it can also mean that something that happens to us now is a consequence of something we've done in the past. Now, that's all right when life is going well, but when something difficult happens, then the inference is that this is in some way either brought upon by yourself or some form of judgment. So there's a lot to unpack there if we're able to help people in these times of crisis. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture of that total pain, referring to certain aspects of psychological pain, spiritual, physical, and social. So within spiritual pain, therefore, they may be asking, why has this happened to me? If they believe in God, why is God allowing me to suffer? What's the point of it all? Is there meaning or purpose? Will I be forgiven? Is this judgment? All these kind of things. Psychological issues are around all sorts of things. Anger at the diagnosis, I should have gone to the doctor sooner, etc., etc. And socially is about, you know, will my family survive financially when I'm gone? Those kind of questions as well. Dame Cicely Saunders could see the importance of recognizing all the effects of the illness on a person and that they are often interlinked. Therefore, it's essential that we don't focus solely on the physical symptoms, as we've said. Next slide, please. So that's what we're trying to achieve in a very whistle-stop tour way. Happily speak to any of you in due course at length about that. So all about us. What can we do? Now, essentially, number one is be ourselves here. And I think often the nature of someone who wants to volunteer in the hospice are the kind of people who, you know, are happy to do these things. So we can offer active, sensitive listening. So even in the shops, you know, some big conversations can take place. People will say, you know, my husband, my wife was under the care of the hospice, and they'll want to tell their story. So just sensitive listening is important for them at that moment. Empathy, a warm, honest response, non-judgmental, our common humanity, I think it should be at the top. A sense of humor when appropriate. There is laughter in the hospice, mostly appropriate. Our presence by being there. You know, I think for folk, so many will find that people really struggle to be present with those who are either have a terminal diagnosis or indeed have suffered the loss of a loved one. Self-awareness. So how does this make me feel? It's good sometimes to just recognize the way we feel after those conversations as well. You know, am I feeling the weight of someone else's grief? Is this mine to own, or actually do I need to put it down? And silence sometimes. Sometimes there's nothing to be said, but silence is a good thing. Next slide, please. So when it comes to spirituality, spirituality is better than jelly. It includes whatever gives a person meaning, worth, or value, if we're going to just put it in a little one-liner. The importance of religion as part of this will depend on the individual. So we make no presumptions about that. So chaplaincy, spirituality is not about, so we get people say, well, I'm not religious, but they're not understanding quite what we're talking about. So I want that message to be clear, really, when we're talking about spiritual care. We're not necessarily talking about religious care. And spiritual care is in the hands of all who are parts of palliative care services, including volunteers. So we're not asking you to have any great in-depth conversation about philosophy or religion per se. It's just being present with people and enabling them to lead a conversation in which you are actively listening to them and empathizing with them and being there. And then we're going to just do a very quick bit, aren't we, Hannah, on communication on, God, I got through that quick, didn't I? Any questions on that before I go on to communication, maybe we should say?
So it sounds to me like it's the essence of a person, spirituality.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's come to me from listening to you in the very first question. Because when I said beliefs, I didn't necessarily mean religious beliefs, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. I mean, what makes us human, you could argue, you know, it is the essence of an individual. Yeah. So often unique to everyone, you know, and often I think, as I say, for some people, this view of themselves is not formulated until they're faced with the difficult stuff in life for some people, you know, and so in a sense, they're formulating that themselves. They're learning about themselves in those situations. And all of us have a part to play in supporting them in that. So it's not a surprise to us when people engage in those kinds of conversations. Whereas in other circumstances, they might go, why are you talking to me about this? You know, so you know, to be prepared to listen to someone enables them, it facilitates them to have those conversations.
Michael,
Good.
did you have a question?
Well, yeah, sort of. Who's this John Whitty guy?
Sorry, Michael?
I said, who's this John Whitty guy?
Chris Whitty.
Chris Whitty.
Oh, Chris Whitty.
Next slide.
It's Chris Whitty. He was, you know Chris Whitty? If you watch the news, he's on the news quite a lot. And okay. And when, you know, our government are doing these presentations, they don't seem to be able to move the slides on themselves. They have to go next slide, please. So sorry if that was. I hope you haven't been thinking about Chris Whitty for the whole of that presentation. So,
no.
It's really important palliative care person. I'm not aware.
Well, he is the chief medical officer or something, isn't he? But,
I was thinking, I know that name, but is there somebody else at Arthur Rank named Chris Whitty?
I know. I'm sorry.
I got it now, though.
That teaches me to make flippant comments, won't it?
Right. Okay.
All right. Okay. So let's have a little look at communication. Some of you may know this, but it's good to remind you about it. So this is the communication cake. There's other ways of looking at communication, but communication is much more than the words that we use. It's important to pay attention to the words that you say, of course, Keith, things like Chris Whitty, but even more the way in which you say it. So, so the words we actually use as part of the communication cake is only 7%. 38% is tonal. So the emphasis in the voice. And of course, you know, anger is quite evident, not necessarily in the words that someone says, but the way they say it. So the tone and pitch of your voice and the speed at which you speak is a large percentage of communication. But 55% is the non-verbal. Now, that's the problem we have on Zoom, isn't it? Because we just see this much of everyone. But actually, for all you know, these, you know, I've learned not to use my hands. I wonder if when I'm in a room with people, whether I'll use my hands again, because whether they've come out of use. In fact, the other day I went into a room to do some teaching, but it turned out that there were so many people using computers elsewhere that I ended up sitting in front of a computer with other people in the room looking at computers as well. So it was a bit disappointing, to be honest with you. So 55% of communication is non-verbal. That's your body language, that's your gestures, expressions, how you stand or how you sit. So, I mean, a lot of obvious stuff, but, you know, if you really want to enter into a conversation with someone and they need to know that you're prepared to enter into that conversation, if they're sitting down, then it would be helpful if you sat down. If you remain standing, then they presume you're still prepared to run away or whatever. So nevertheless, certainly within the hospice, you know, I would say to chaplaincy volunteers, you know, don't presume on anything, you would ask, is it all right if I get a chair? So that way they could say yes, or they could say no. And they're kind of have a role in inviting you to come and sit with them and talk to them, but also you're indicating that you're prepared to listen. So good listening skills include making eye contact, not interrupting, being non-judgmental. That includes what we show on our faces. So yeah, I mean, people will tell you things, and depending on your worldview or whatever, you know, you might think that's a little bit much, you know, and you might show that. Try not to show that in your face. Non-judgmental, give your full attention. Leaning in, not so good on the screen, but when you're with someone, leaning forward it indicates that you're intentionally listening to them. Be yourself, be natural. We've said that. And listening for what is not said as well. Sometimes, you know, I think if you're certainly more intent in listening, you know, you may notice that someone's not referring to certain things. And certainly we would pick up on that in an engagement with someone. So there may not be an answer to spiritual questions or any question. The important thing is giving your time, attention, concern, and acceptance, and let them speak. Don't feel you must speak. Silence gives time to think and encourages the other person to add more detail to their concerns. So all I'm talking about is those times when you find yourself in a situation in the shop or wherever you are, in the hospice, where you just need to think, actually, does this person want to say a bit more? Because if you're on the inpatient unit, for example, taking meals around, that's another place where people want to engage in conversation. In the bistro, all sorts of places. So don't be surprised if they do that. We're not asking you, you know, to have a thesis on communication. It's just be yourself and be prepared and ready for them to and have that facility to be able to speak to you if they want to. Last slide, I think, isn't it? Next slide, please.
Michael, do you have a question?
Oh, Michael, sorry, Michael, not paying attention.
Oh, no, it's all right. Just a little bit of a comment that I think, you know, it kind of comes down to motivation and intent. You know, it's not that necessarily it's about kind of being, you know, a robot, or, you know, thinking, okay, I've got the eyes in the right place, I've got the shoulders in the right place, you know, but these things probably, for the most part, kind of actually kind of spring forth naturally from genuine interest and kind of care. Yeah, absolutely. You know? So I don't know. Yeah. I know what you mean. I'm not. Yeah, you don't need a little card going, I must lean in and I must, you know. And I agree with you. I guess it's just good to be reminded of these things, but you're absolutely right. You know, absolutely, and not to be critical of them at all. You know, just to think of, you know, the source of it. It's about having that intent, isn't it? Absolutely right. And if we've got that intent, then hopefully the rest of it will follow. Absolutely right. But it's also just realizing this is one of those moments. You know, I think when we're doing stuff, you know, we have to sometimes just be listening out for those moments. This is that moment where this person just needs me to just stop what I'm doing for a few minutes and listen. So yeah. Anyone else?
No. I think we've only got one more slide, haven't we?
I think which just says, do you have any concerns or questions, isn't it? Oh, that one. Where's that? Oh, they're out of order. Okay, so yes, looking after yourself. I guess this is about just a bit of balance. You'll probably be, I'm guessing most of you doing, I don't know, half a day, something like that. So the balance of, I think, depending on the circumstance of your role, you know, it can be quite intense. So it's important that you do take care of yourself. And if you have an encounter and sometimes people get, oh, I wonder if I said the right thing, that kind of thing, then please do, if you want to, just have a conversation with Hannah or Tina or myself, you know, about how that went. And if you want to. So you need to be aware of the effects that working with people at the end of life has on you personally. and know how and where you can get support. So that is from us. So you might, if you're in the hospice when that day comes back, you might go away feeling quite tired and with a slight sense of heaviness. And it's important that you kind of recognize that in yourself and see that where that's from, because we don't want you to go away heavy. I mean, you will come across sad situations. All right, I'm not denying that, of course, but we have to find a way of caring, but equally not carrying that around with us all the while. So we need to try and find things that help you recharge your batteries, and commit finding time to enjoy those activities. And also acknowledge your own limitations. So you don't know till you try it what it's like, but if you find it difficult, then please do say so. So yeah, I'm happy to talk to people, or equally Hannah is. Reflect and discuss with colleagues, or Hannah or Sina. Access support, and identify your own training needs in relation to spiritual care and other stuff. So there are training courses on at the hospice, and you are entitled and welcome to take part in those. The more knowledge we have, the better equipped we are to help people. Next slide, please. There it is. So, any concerns or questions?